healing journey. This is the healing journey support group, but we say the healing journey, the learning journey, because our mission is to educate, inform, and support along this journey. This is our lessons learned. Lee Ethel, welcome this evening.
Good evening, Lynn. Good evening, Attorney Morton. It's so good to be here with you today. I'm excited.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited too. I'm glad to do it. Thank you for the eyes for all you do.
Wonderful. So, Attorney Morton, we asked you to be on here this evening. And before we get into why we asked you to be on here this evening, we just want, Lee is going to just tell the people a little bit about you and who you are. So, Lee.
And this will be as I know it, Attorney Morton. And this is what I received at the conference where I first met you. And it was just such a wonderful conference. And I was so glad to meet you there. My heart just jumped when you spoke or so, and I read what they had in the booklet about you. So I'm just excited. I'm glad I was there. Jim Morton has practiced criminal law for nearly 40 years, defending clients in cases of national significance. He has handled complex trials involving false confessions, hypnosis, and some of South Carolina's earliest DNA cases. Morton's experience includes roles as a prosecutor and public defender in Richland County and as a founding partner of the law firms of Morton and Geddes in Rock Hill, South Carolina. In his career, Morton has prosecuted, and defended thousands of felony cases, including dozens of murders and 5 death penalties. Notably, he was selected by 3 circuit solicitors as a special prosecutor for homicide cases while in private practice. Attorney Martin's involvement extends beyond the courthouse. He has served on various associations and boards, including the South Carolina Commission on Lawyers' Conduct and South Carolina ACLU, where he spent 3 years as president. And additionally, he has contributed to the MUSC Board of Visitors and Hollings Cancer Career Center and served as chairman of the York County Democratic Party. Martin earned his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of South Carolina, followed by his doctorate from the University of South Carolina's School of Law. He's licensed to practice in South Carolina, the U.S. District Court for the District of South Carolina, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Attorney Jim Morton, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm sure I left out a lot of stuff because you've done so much over your time. And certainly if you want to give us some of the other things that you've done, please do so. And we just want to hear about some of the wonderful things that you've done.
Well, thank you so much, Lee, for that kind introduction. And I have been fortunate to be involved in some cases involving people who were prosecuted, a couple of them by me, who I later determined to be innocent, a couple, more than a couple who are innocent. You know, one thing that who I've defended who were convicted of murder who were completely innocent. One thing that I've learned in my career is that this is not a perfect system. As I'm sure so many people know, there are guilty people who go free. There are innocent people who are convicted. There are many others who are given time in prison beyond what is necessary to rehabilitate them or punish them. I learned a lot of that in my time as an attorney, which I still am, and as on the ACLU. We have so many people that are in prison who do not need to be there. It
Yes.
taxes us all as taxpayers. It taxes the families of people who have loved ones in prison. You can only imagine. I think y'all are very well aware of what it can mean to a family whose loved one is put in prison for long periods of time, or for any period of time. It destroys the families. I can't imagine having to go through that and what it does to the children and spouses of people who are uh, incarcerated for any period of time, but especially for long periods of time. And there are people who need to go to prison, obviously, and who have done some horrible things. There are also a lot of people who did things when they were young men or women who have served a lot of time and who have changed significantly into the type of person that they are. Unfortunately, it's a political system that we have. The powers that be often do not want to be seen as being lenient on people, even though the people have changed, and they get pressure not only from victims but from the public, and they have it's mass incarceration, and something needs to be done about it. I fortunately was able to help one man in particular, and I'll be glad to go into that if you want me to start going into that. And please interrupt whenever you feel that I'm not being clear, which is probably going to happen. I was a young prosecutor in 1989 in Colombia. There were four murders that summer that the police believed were linked to one another. They couldn't initially solve who was behind these four murders. They were all prostitute related. There were two prostitutes and the 3-year-old little girl of a prostitute who were murdered, and the police could not find the culprit. They eventually came upon a witness, a fourth, a lady who was also a prostitute, who claimed that a man by the name of Doug O'Neill, and I've told this story many times, and I'm not sharing any confidences here. The police determined from this witness that her pimp, as she claimed, named Doug O'Neill, was responsible for all these four murders. They charged him basically as being a serial killer. They went to his home in Colombia on February the 1st of 1990 and arrested him in front of his wife and children. He had no prior record. They put him in jail. He remained in jail for the next 25 years. I had subsequently moved from Colombia to Rock Hill, and I was contacted one day by a woman who I did not know, who asked me if I would meet with her or I would be willing to look into the case that Mr. O'Neill was eventually prosecuted for. The police dropped three of the charges because they didn't have enough evidence. But we went forward on the fourth charge, and which was the death of a prostitute. We convicted Mr. O'Neill. I was a prosecutor on that case. We had to try it twice because of some jury irregularities. We convicted him twice. I went over and pointed in his face and said, "This man is a murderer. He killed this lady. He needs to go to jail for the rest of his life." And that's exactly what the jury did. And that's exactly what the judge sentenced him to. And then 25 years later, I was contacted by this woman who said that she had information through a former inmate at the Department of Corrections who had served time with Mr. Doug O'Neill, that this former colleague of his who had gotten out of prison and began a car tire shop had told everybody that wanted to listen that he believed Doug O'Neill to be innocent. This lady listened. She contacted me, asked me if I would be willing to review the case. I said, sure. She was very apprehensive about meeting me. We met one night at Columbia, at the Richland County Library in Columbia. I told her, she presented me with what she thought were the reasons why he was innocent. I started looking into it. I was able to go back and look at the evidence that we had submitted in court that day or that week. I went to Broad River Correctional Institution where Mr. O'Neill had served 25 years. I talked with him. He was in a wheelchair. He was suffering from multiple myeloma. He said that he harbored no ill feelings toward me. He forgave me for everything that I had done. We prayed. He cried. I went there a couple of times and met with him. I became convinced over the time that I researched my prosecution of him that I thought I had prosecuted an innocent man. I went to the Richland County Sheriff's Department and to the solicitor's office in Columbia and tried to convince them of the same thing. They were friends of mine. They weren't hearing anything I had to say. They said they had convicted the right man. He was in prison for a reason, and that was that he was guilty of this. I felt very strongly the other way. To try and get someone out of jail who's been sentenced to life in prison is a long, tedious process that you go through in federal court. You have to file what they call a habeas corpus motion. You have to have it heard by a federal magistrate. You have to have it heard then by a federal district judge. There's lots of paperwork, lots of testimony, lots of things that you have to produce that takes years to do. And people that do this kind of work should be commended. I could not get any help or support. Usually, you need help from the current solicitor or from the sheriff's department to go in and support what you say. A lot of times, a federal magistrate or a federal judge is not going to listen to somebody and let that be it. And I knew that. I tried. But eventually, I learned that Mr. O'Neill was coming up for his parole hearing. And so I decided that I would go to the parole hearing. He had been denied parole several times. The parole board always wants an inmate seeking parole to come and ask for forgiveness, express remorse for what they've done, uh, tell the parole board what they've done to try and better themselves. But the main thing that they want to hear is that the person is sorry for what they've done and they are remorseful. Well, Mr. O'Neill was never able to do that because he was innocent and he refused to tell a lie and refused to go in there and say that. So I went to the parole board with him. I told the parole board that had convicted an innocent man, that I believed strongly for various reasons that I had convicted an innocent man, and that if they would allow Mr. O'Neill an opportunity, that he had a place to live. I thought if he didn't, he could come live with me.
Wow.
And Mr. O'Neill and I and so they granted him parole. In June, I think, of 2014, he had served 24 and a half years. I went to the prison. I picked him up. I drove him out of prison. We did some interviews. And so I'm very proud of that. He and I have remained friends over the years. I spoke at his wedding. He and my wife are friends. I'm friends with his family. And I feel very strongly about what I did that day. Unfortunately, I have been on the other end of that as a defense attorney, and I know for a fact that I have defended some people that have been convicted of innocent crimes. People are convicted innocently all the time, whether it be for DUI or whether it be for murder. I got involved with the Innocence Project. South Carolina does not have a viable innocence project. And the innocence projects are, of course, who y'all know go around and try and prove the innocence of people that they have determined to be innocent, people who are serving significant terms. South Carolina doesn't have an innocence project. There are probably 75 innocence projects around the country. I think there are 3 states that don't have them, South Carolina being one of them. And it's something that we really need terribly, and that some people are working on to try and get that started so that there are ways in which lawyers and citizens can go to bat for people and prove their innocence. And so that's one thing that I've been working on really strongly since I was able to determine that Mr. O'Neill was innocent and able to get him some help.
That is
Yeah.
awesome. It's just so much. It's just how you went back, you prayed with him, you picked him up, and he was a forgiving man as well. He held, you know, no, oh my God, he
Animosity.
held nothing. Yeah. I wanted to touch on one thing. You are a mentor at the University of South Carolina School of Law. That is great. These are the kind of stories that the new lawyers or the students coming in law school need to hear about. Your
Yeah.
persistence. You were
Mhm.
persistent in letting them know, hey, I prosecuted an innocent man. You know, you that took a lot for you to go forth and say maybe his civil liberties were violated. He was innocent. And one thing you mentioned, he never said he was remorseful because he
That's
didn't do the crime.
that's right.
So I wanted to ask you a question. For instance, the Innocence Project, there's a big one in California and in several states, as you said. It takes so many years for them to process. I don't know if it's the amount of cases they have to process, but it takes so long to process if they're innocent. And then does that depend on the nature of the crime? For instance, someone who was at the wrong place at the wrong time, but was truthful about somebody else doing it, the Innocence Project cannot help them because it's just so many questions with the Innocent Project. If you can just explain how they work and the length of time it takes.
Well, first of all, let me say how I think I got to prosecute an innocent man,
Okay.
and how that happens in so many jurisdictions across this country. I think the police and prosecutors have a unique relationship. In the case of Mr. O'Neill, the police and we were friends. We had dinner together. We would go have a drink together. They were friends of mine, and so when they come to you with a case and say this is the evidence that we have and this is why we think that this man is guilty, you want to make it happen.
Yes.
You try to make the pieces fit to a puzzle that don't necessarily fit, but you make them fit. You think you're doing the right thing. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time I prosecuted him. I thought he was guilty. I wanted to win. I was a young prosecutor who wanted
Hmm. Hmm.
to have a good career, and I wanted this to be a big part of my career. And then so that's how I got caught up into this, and I think that's how so many prosecutors do. It's hard for them, hard for me. It was hard for them to admit that they made a mistake.
Hmm.
But when they so as far as the innocence projects are concerned, you have lots of people in prison. The volume surely just too much
Okay.
for. So in North Carolina, for instance, they have three innocence projects, and Georgia has an innocence project. It's a very involved system, so that if you're in jail and you're claiming your innocence, you have to get somebody to investigate it
Hmm.
and to support you and to take your case to court. So that requires an investigator. That requires clerical help, office help. I think it would be a great project for. I spoke at Wofford, and they have done some things to try and help get an innocence project off the ground. But for instance, University of South Carolina School of Law has not been forthcoming. The College of Charleston School of Law has not been forthcoming. They need to step up, and they could do it by providing clinics for law students to be involved to help investigate these cases and help provide the evidence to go forward. Innocence projects, they have to draw the line somewhere. they can't just by resources can't be involved in every case or everybody who's serving a small sentence. They can't be involved in everybody who is. They try to reserve their resources for people who are what they call actually innocent, not just procedurally innocent, not just because the courts made a mistake, but because there has been a false confession, because witnesses have recanted, because there have been confidential jailhouse informants involved who have recanted. And that happened after I got involved in Mr. O'Neill's case. So there is a lot of work that has to go in to an actual innocence case or to somebody who makes a claim that they're innocent. I get letters still to this day from people I don't even know who have learned about some of my past work and who ask me to come and help them. And I try to do what I can, but you have to have a resource filled innocence project to do the work and to investigate staff to follow behind you to take these calls, and the files are often voluminous, and you got to go through them. That takes a long time. You have to have people to help you do that. You have to have people to go to the prison. You have to have people to figure out what went wrong in court, and sometimes it takes years, as you all know. With the advent of DNA, a lot of this is DNA oriented, but there are a lot of people that are in prison for false confessions and false identifications. I think I prosecuted more uh, than just Mr. O'Neill for something that they didn't do. I prosecuted a man for uh, going into an office building in Columbia in the evening and finding a secretary there alone by herself and raping her. I convicted him based upon her uh, identification in a photo lineup, and he's probably still doing his 25 years. Uh, upon reflection, that was pretty much all they had. It's hard for a jury when a victim comes into court or when witnesses come into court and say, this is the man who assaulted me, or these are the reasons that we think this man is guilty. As a prosecutor, you have the staff, you have SLED, you have the sheriff's department, you have deputies in the courtroom, you have all these people
Yeah.
coming in the courtroom, and then on the other side of the courtroom, you have some man with his lawyer sitting there by themselves, and they're often represented by public defenders that just don't have the resources that the DA's office and the government do. So it's a hard job to get that kind of evidence in front of a jury, and it's even harder when once they've been convicted to get it reversed. So it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of resources that only institutions like law schools or colleges can provide. And I think that there's a way for them to recap their resources. I think that it would be a draw for the South Carolina School of Law to say we have a viable, strong resource provided innocence
Mm.
project. I think that would draw students to the university who want to be involved in something. I think it's a win-win.
Yeah.
But so far they've not been willing to go along. And there are other reasons for that, but the work goes on. People at Wofford and around the state and the country are involved in this and feel strongly about it, and they're willing to keep going forward, as am I.
Yes. I just thank you for acknowledging that too many are in there that don't need to be in there. Our system
That's right.
needs, it needs to be reformed. And, if you really think about, they go in and it's just so many that don't need to be in there. And
Well, it's
that
so
is a real
yeah,
problem.
yeah. It is so sad when I go to the house now, and you'll see the Department of Corrections uh, officers wheeling in a man for some kind of hearing, and he's 70 years old. He's in a wheelchair. He's been in jail for 40 years. You can't harm anybody if you wanted to, but the political pressure, if he were to be given
Yes.
some relief, the political pressure is so great And the burden on the taxpayers and on the Department of Corrections to take care of all these
Yes.
people who really don't need to be there. It's a terrible thing to see. It's a terrible thing to be a witness to.
Yes, it is. I know every time I go, it's just so hard. But I wanted to ask you, because a loved one whose loved one has just been arrested, on criminal charges or whatever it may be, what advice could you give them?
Well, you have to obviously have lawyers who care,
Hmm.
um, and you have to meet with the lawyers and convince them of your situation as to why they uh, did not do this, or if they did, the mitigating circumstances involved. It takes persistence. It takes dedicated people who are willing to listen. But you just have to be persistent. You have to be nice. You, public defenders and defense attorneys hear all the time why someone's loved one should not be found guilty, or why they're not, why they shouldn't be sentenced to uh, a significant sentence. I hear people all the time saying, he can't, or she can't, go do time. They've got a family. They've got, the prosecutor, he's got a job, or she's got a job, and she didn't mean to do it, or she didn't. They hear that stuff all the time, and prosecutors and judges hear it all the time too. They become immune to it. They think that, and I tell people all the time, that doesn't matter really, that he doesn't deserve this. What matters are your persistence in telling his story, mitigation, getting someone on your side to believe in what you're saying,
Hmm.
and you have to do that in a way that they want to get involved, that they want to dedicate their time to it, not because you necessarily deserve it, or they've wronged you or something, but they need, you need a defense counsel who is going to be involved as much as the resources allow.
Okay. And that's important. I just, it's just so much. It destroys the families. It does
It
so much.
does.
And the loved one on the outside needs the support to support the loved one on the inside. And it's so
Hmm.
much because the amount of money, the financial struggles, that come along with that. And then if they can't, Lee and I have found out so much while we're on this journey about the bailout project. The bail project will bail you out if you qualify, and there's so many things that we have learned.
Well, there's a statute in South Carolina that says people should be given a bail. They should be released on their own personal recognizance,
Hmm.
unless the one of these two things are proven: they're a danger to the community, or they're a threat to flee. But oftentimes, these magistrates that set bond, they I'm not saying they make stuff up, but when you have somebody arrested for instance, there's a first time offender and they're a drug offense or whatever it is, and the judge sets a 25 or $50,000 bond, it just all becomes about money.
Yes,
They don't follow the statute that is already in place that says they should be given a bond unless you can show they're a danger to the community or they're a threat to flee. And a lot of people are not a threat to flee. They've never been outside the state to begin with. They've made a mistake, maybe, but they're not a danger to the community. And what good does a cash bond? All it does is make somebody go out and borrow money,
yeah,
or mortgage whatever they've got to put up a cash bond. It's just punishing the people that don't have it, really, is what it
exactly.
is.
Exactly. And that is so true. And we hear that all the time. I don't have the money for bail. I don't have this, I don't have that. And when people come to our lessons learned, we connect them. And that is the first thing. I'm sitting here until my hearing because I can't afford, the bail and things of that nature. So You just put that in perspective, and I
Mhm.
thank you for that. There's so many politics involved in this social justice movement here. And the movement is to reform all of this, and it needs to be reformed, because sometimes public service and different things that, not public service, but doing different things can give someone who's done wrong, like we go with restorative practices, and they're involved in doing community work and things of that nature. The families are bonding together, and that's where the change comes in, having them, changing that community that they live in, changing them in that community, one person at a time. So I thank you for the work that you're doing in South Carolina, and we want to come into South Carolina, and we will definitely be having you with us because you're doing marvelous. It speaks volumes to you how you are helping. You don't find too many attorneys that will go back and say, I made a mistake. That takes a lot. So I thank you and I commend you for doing that because everybody doesn't have a conscience. Some people, I don't see how they can sleep at night. But when something is not rubbing you the right way, it's on you. And that, for me, the Holy Spirit will tug at me and say, you got to do this, you have to do that. So I thank you for the work you're doing in South Carolina and for bringing the Innocence Project in there. That is
Well,
wonderful.
thank you so much for your kind words. And there are a lot of people out there that are doing it, not just me. And it takes persistence and perseverance, and the work that y'all do is so helpful and so beneficial to so many people that otherwise would not help it
Thank
have
you
helped.
so much. Thank you. We appreciate it. We're learning as we're on this journey, and that's what's important. We're trying to support others. There's so much you don't know. So for you to talk and tell us what we need to, that is so important. So we inform and educate, and you did that tonight. You educated and informed. Lee, do you have any questions?
I just a few comments or so. I know Attorney Morton was speaking in reference to the cash bond, and a lot of times that bond is so it's set high to the point that the person trying to get out, that family can't afford it, so it's not reachable in most cases and stuff, and their loved ones end up having to sit because of that. So I just wanted to mention that. Also, we were talking about the Innocence Program, and I learned when we were at Walford that with that program, they're there, but there's so many. It's in so many different steps that they have to go through in order to get to the point of finally having a person released or so, if they will. And that's why it takes a lot of time too. This is such a process that you could never imagine. Also, Attorney Morton was speaking in reference to um, the amount of people that it takes in reference to get some of these things done. And I was just wondering if there's any type of volunteer program where someone can uh, um, offer some time to invest in some of these things. I know in South Carolina for a number of years, I was a guardian ad litem with the court system in reference to the children in reference to um, different things in the home and stuff. But are there programs or so that someone could volunteer to help or work with these programs to try to get some of these things done?
Well, y'all are volunteers, and thank you for volunteering. And every organization needs dedicated volunteers. Unfortunately, you have to have somewhere to volunteer to. You have to have a structure in place that's going to listen, that's going to
You're right.
accept your services and say, this is how you can help us. And unfortunately, South Carolina doesn't have that right now. Walford is trying to start, and that's they have some people there who are dedicated people and some nonprofits like yourselves, people that can gather information and say, like this lady said to me, this is a case that somebody needs to look at, but you have to have somewhere to go. and that's what we're trying to establish.
Great.
And
Putting
that's
it on
important.
the list.
That's so important.
Yes, ma'am.
Someone, a comment just put on there, yes, it is. A gun charge should be 2 years and not 4 to 5 years. And then they're saying the drug charges that people have been in for drug charges for years and years and
Mhm.
years, and that should be uh, overturned and lessened the amount of time. So we know the work that needs to be done in the
Mhm.
social justice arena, and it takes people like you and us
Absolutely.
fighting with you for what needs to be perfected. I don't even know if you can ever perfect it, but there needs to be some other measures there and really reform on the inside,
Mhm.
because, you think about it, a lot of the prisons don't really have the reform that should be in there.
Mm.
Well, I look forward to staying in touch with you
Yeah,
guys, and
thank you.
we can put our work together, and maybe we can make some progress. One case at a time.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for being with us, Attorney Morton. God bless you
Absolutely.
and what you're doing out there to help us all.
Yeah.
Thank you,
It's
Thank,
everybody.
thank
it's
you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us. It's so great to know that there are people out there that are helping and willing to help and stuff, because so often we have one perspective of attorneys and prosecutors in the court system. But it's wonderful to know that it's broader than that. And we have to look at so much more. So thank you for all that you do for
Thank
families.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good